Okay, we're here to talk to you about stormwater system maintenance for, like you said, from a bunch of local cities and county. I want to give you some practical info for everyday businesses in Utah County. We're going to go over the plan, the agreement, and inspections. This image you see is a long-term, called the Long-Term Stormwater Management Plan, or LTSWMP. Since that's quite a mouthful, we've recently changed the broader community to O&M, or the Stormwater System Operations and Maintenance Plan. So it looks very similar to this typically for municipalities. So what is the plan and what's in it? There's contact information for the owner. There is a designated user, whether that's a tenant or the owner, and a property management contact. It also delegates who's responsible for what and the responsibility in general of the owner to maintain the system. There's a description of the stormwater system. It's usually about a paragraph long, and I find that particularly helpful. It'll describe it something like the roof drain system is piped to the STORMNet system, which is then released into the city system. So it's a short description of how your stormwater system works, which is very helpful if you're a new owner that just bought the property. There's a pollution prevention plan. We've talked a ton about pollution prevention. We'll talk about it a little bit more. And standard operating procedures, or SOPs, that describe to your property managers or the third-party person on how to do their procedures. And then training requirements for employees, and inspection and maintenance requirements, how to maintain the system and how often, how to inspect it, how to know when to maintain it. And most importantly for me, and my opinion, is a map of the stormwater system so you know where everything is at. Now, I have a picture of a vacuum here, which seems unrelated, but I just wanted it to relate to something that everybody knows how to use. So if a vacuum, you're using it and it gets full of debris, it's not going to work very well. And you're going to be like, what the heck? Why isn't my vacuum working? Well, if you had read the operations and maintenance manual, you would know to clean out that debris bin, and it's going to work a lot more effectively for you and last a lot longer. The machine will last longer. So your stormwater system is a machine that does need to be maintained. And now I'm going to kind of repeat myself on how do I use it, because this is the most important part. So it's to understand what you are responsible for and why, to understand how and when to maintain the system, to reduce your risk of illicit discharges. If you're maintaining your system, then you're going to have a reduced risk of it because there's less pollutants in your system that will be discharged outside of your property. And to train employees on how to protect stormwater quality and to increase the longevity and effectiveness of the system. So that's the plan. This is what the agreement looks like. Typically, you may not have the exact formatting, but it'll look very similar to this. This is taken from, again, that broader community of long-term management. The agreement looks like this. It's going to have a project name and address, a parcel number, so to identify it, and that's so that it can be recorded properly to the county. Some of the language in that inspection and maintenance agreement is the owner, its successors, and assigns, including any homeowners association, shall adequately maintain the stormwater facilities in accordance with the plan. Ensure the stormwater facilities are inspected biennially, and I highlighted that because biennially is not biannually. So it's not a twice a year, it's every other year. That report needs to be submitted to the city, and that's your bare minimum, is to be looked at and maintained biennially. Other parts of the agreement are going to say inspected annually. That's you're looking over it, and we're going to go and talk about how to look over your system. And then another part is be responsible for maintaining all inspection records and must make such records available to the city upon request. So not only maintain and inspect your system, but have record of it so that it's provable because it's in writing. So again, the plan and the agreement are one thing together. The agreement is useless if you don't have a plan, which is that operation maintenance manual, so to speak, because it references the plan over and over in the agreement, and vice versa. The plan is not useless, but the plan is not as effective if the agreement is not there to legally bind owner and city to make sure that that maintenance is happening. Again, it's recorded to the property, so it runs with the land. It's going to be with that parcel or that property for forever, essentially, unless written in otherwise. It is required by the state of Utah to enter into these agreements, so it's a requirement, and it's in the best interest of the property owner and the city. So why do I say it's in the owner's best interest? Because it absolutely is. It increases the longevity of your system. So this device you see, it can be like a 90-degree elbow, or it can be something that's, I don't want to say the proprietary device, but a snout. How it functions is all the sediment can settle down as that water sits there. It's ponding. The sediment settles out. Any floatables such as trash, grocery bags, whatever, an apple core, that's going to float on top, and then that snout or the elbow comes down, and the clean water in the middle is what gets injected or move along in your system, whether that's to a grass swale or an injection type structure such as storm tech chambers or a sump. So those white elbows, they can be black, are there to help pre-treat the water before it goes further. And then that debris can be removed without harming further facilities down that line. So that's good. And then mitigate flooding. If those pretreatment areas and basins are regularly serviced and inspected, again, I say mitigate flooding. So there's those huge rainstorm events that no amount of storm system is going to help, but you will mitigate your flood risk if your system is maintained. It reduces illicit discharges. Again, if that's regularly maintained, you have less gunk coming out in your outfall areas, and it reduces your liability. For example, let's say your neighbor floods and they're blaming you because you're upstream as an owner. You can pull out your records that you've kept and say, actually, I maintained my system 6 months ago and inspected it. Here's the report. It very likely is not my fault. So it can reduce your liability, not eliminate. And then stewardship is the most important one to me. This is an image of Utah Lake. We've talked a ton about Utah Lake, the Provo watershed, the Jordan River watershed. Outdoor recreation in Utah Valley is huge. And this is a huge lake that not very many people use, in my opinion. And it's because that they wish there was no algae blooms, and they wish the fishing was better quality. It wasn't just carp type thing. So make your wishes a reality for our area by starting where you live and work, whether that's your business or your home. Change your mindset. Watch where water is going when it rains. Where does that water go? What's in it? Be mindful of keeping those pollutants out of your system to save you money and to save the environment. Moving on to the third one is inspections. So we're going to go over kind of how to inspect your site. You're always going to refer to the agreement and the plan we talked about. So use the map. Again, this is my favorite part. There is somebody on this webinar that this is their site, and it's one of the most favorite ones I've seen. So I use it as an example for a lot of my forms. This is something called a long-term BMP. It's user-friendly. We've taken out all the details of the structures so that long-term inspectors, whether it's a city oversight person like me, or a third party, or the owner themselves, when they're doing an inspection, it's very clear which structure is being referred to. So you can see, hopefully you can see this. If you can't, you can zoom in or get closer to your screen. There's curb cuts that are labeled, number 1, 2, 3, 4. And then roof drains are labeled, trench drains are labeled, catch basins are labeled. That way, the inspection report is very clear, and it says catch basin number 3 needs to be maintained. Here's a picture. Or it will need to be serviced soon because it's at 10% capacity. So use the map when doing inspections. It is super critical and makes it clear, and makes your records clear cut on what you're talking about and where. So inspect each called out structure, yes, but equally as important is the site as a whole. So you're looking at each structure, but what is going to those structures? Look around. That's the most important part of stormwater. Like we've talked about in other seminars, we need to look at pollutant sources. What pollutants are on your site? How can you reduce exposure of these materials to stormwater? What do your employees or tenants need to know? Examples of concerns that have been mentioned are open dumpster lids. We don't want stormwater going into that dumpster and then being leaked out because the dumpster plug is missing when you could just have lids on it and the stormwater would never mix with those pollutants. Lack of training, a common one the cities see is the grease trap for a restaurant may be full or not functioning properly. And so employees who don't know any better, or if they do, they're just not being a great person, but usually they just don't know better. They find the next nearest floor drain and they think this is good. I'll just dump it in there, not knowing that that goes to stormwater and that is affecting and is a pollutant source. And then leaking vehicles. Here's some pictures. Here's some, it's chemicals like for the turf, so pesticides, herbicides type thing. Those are being exposed to stormwater unnecessarily. Those are already rinsed out jugs, I hope, but they could just be put in the trash so that nothing's going to stormwater. This is again, employees dumping into a storm drain, and that's all the grease residue around it. So that's how we knew it was happening and it got reported. So employees need training to not do things like that and to notify management or their company that the grease trap needs to be serviced. For redevelopment sites, sometimes areas are redeveloped that didn't have a previously existing grease trap, and that is the issue, is that they don't have one in the first place. So looking at that during the development phase is also important. And the last example I have for this is erodible soils. So the site itself is the asphalt and that finished catch basin. It doesn't have any pollutants going to it other than some blown in trash, but off-site is some soil coming onto site and going straight into that catch basin. So unstabilized soils can also be a pollutant source and should be looked at if you ever see soils coming onto your site or your own soils are going into catch basins. They need to be stabilized and at the very least the inlet protected with a filter, but ideally if your site is complete, all soils are stabilized. And then this one I particularly like to talk about. It's another thing to look at for your entire site. There's functional and intentional ponding, such as that first photo I showed. It's a detention basin. It's supposed to pond up and allow water to release at a correct rate. And then parking areas can also have intentional ponding and be used as a storage area versus unintentional ponding. So poor planning or poor final grading. This is an image of a large housing area in Orem. The water is always ponding close to the foundations. That's not good for the foundations, and it's not intentional ponding. Some rules of thumb are a foundation of a building should slope away at 0.25 inches a foot for 10 feet. These are just Orem standards, but they're good ones to go by, and they are typical building code standards. Stormwater can jive with all other codes and utilities with careful planning. Buildings with a basement should discharge stormwater about 5 feet away or more to protect, again, the structure of the building. Another thing to look for on site is flow impediments. So here you can see there's gravel infiltration area in one photo and then a sump with gravel as well. So they used a lot of LID on the site, which is awesome, but it's causing some unsightliness because all of their sediment is settling out outside of that infiltration area. You can see it's falling out, and that's because the rocks are impeding the flow of the stormwater into that area. So making sure that final landscaping, whether that's sod or rock, is 2 inches below flow line will allow that LID area to last a lot longer. And Charles will be talking about how to maintain those types of areas when they do get overburdened with sediment. So that's something to look for, is how well is my system functioning? There are signs if you look for them around the site. Another thing to look for is odors and sheens. If your stormwater system catch basins are stinky, that's probably an indicator that something's going in there that shouldn't. Only rain in the drain is the phrase. So if it's stinking, that's not good. Sheens such as oil sheen or this milky stuff, that is reason to talk to employees or look around the site and see where that's coming from so you're not stinky. And then lastly is maintenance operations. Whether that's your property managers or yourself doing the maintenance, be aware of how you can reduce pollutants going onto impervious surfaces. Impervious surfaces It's a super fancy word for sidewalk, cement, parking lot, roofs. So prevent or mitigate them by having a mulch deck for your mower or blowing the grass clippings back into the grass minimally. Mulching deck helps the grass fall where you want it to and helps recycle those nutrients so you can reuse that nitrogen. So make sure employees are aware of that. Another example would be wash waters. Let's say you're having to remove this graffiti on your building. That wash water can go down the gutter into a storm drain system, or inside a building, it's going to go to the floor drain of the sewer. Sewer doesn't want this yucky water either, so be mindful that wash water should be cleaned up appropriately and taken to a licensed facility for disposal. At the very least, call your city, call the sewer and say, is it okay for this wash water to go down there? Or ask your stormwater division. We're always willing to talk to people and educate people. Hey, I'm about to do this project. What can I do to make it safer for stormwater? We love to talk to business owners about anything regarding stormwater. And then this is a project I was part of for when I was in the Parks Division. We cut a big old doorway into the shed to store some equipment. We had a, what is it called? A cement saw. And normally you can wet that so it's not floating away and then falling out of the air down onto hard surfaces and going to stormwater. Before I was in stormwater, I was unaware that all the little things do matter and add up. So make sure that your standard operating procedures cover this. Most cities already have standard operating procedures, and so do developers and engineers to use. It's not like you have to come up with these yourself. All the work is typically done for you in the plan. Thanks. I'll turn the time over to the next presenter. Kelsey York is listed here as well. She is our MS4 coordinator. She knows all. If I don't know the answer, Kelsey does. Thanks.
Thanks, Chelsea. That's a great way to end. If she doesn't know the answer, or if I don't know the answer, she does. I do think just a couple of things to note, Chelsea. First of all, if people have questions for Chelsea, feel free to put them in the chat right now, and I'll keep a record of them for the Q&A session. But also that idea that every little bit counts, right? All of us have a little tiny bit of a role to play. And if we all play it well, all the people that are on today can make a difference. And if we don't, like we all add a little bit to the mess. So thanks, Chelsea, for that reminder and the tips and strategies and the planning and efforts that it requires to keep this stuff up once it's in. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Charles from Utah County to talk about some of the maintenance strategies for different stormwater infrastructure that you might see around your property. Charles?
So I started in the county here in May. And when I first heard about doing maintenance for stormwater structures and all that, this turned out to be an opportune moment for me because the county right now has one that we're doing for a structure that we just finished up. So it's a great learning opportunity for me. But my head automatically went to the storm grate that we see at the bottom. That's all I knew about it. That's all I really thought. So my head kind of thought, well, maybe it's these great big retention structures that we hear about, that it's all good and, and I was like, well, so I looked it up, and the stormwater structure refers to any man-made facility system designed to manage and control stormwater runoff, including structures like pipes, drains, inlets, catch basins, detention ponds, swales, and they all work together to convey and treat stormwater. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch. Utah County this year has 4 different catch basins that we're working on in order to protect the communities downstream. So we have the Hobble Creek Detention Basin up by the golf course, Payson Canyon, which is just up by the power plant there in Payson, the Fifth Range, and Santaquin Canyon. What they do is they go in and they remove all the accumulated silt, they realign stuff, they adjust drainage channels, they take out the weeds, make sure everything's flowing like it should, do repairs as needed. And all this is done kind of like Chelsea said, in order to mitigate flooding, because, we'll do what we can to slow it down. And there's a picture from one when it was in the Santaquin area and all out of a mudslide. I actually live in Santaquin and was there during many of the mudslides after the Molly fire, so it's very real. So, like was noted, you have to look around for different problems that happen within your system and keep track of it. So, excessive vegetation or misaligned pipe, or like Chelsea said, having the drain be impeded so that it can't go down the drain. These are all problems that need to be taken care of. So through proper inspection and maintenance, they can include the inflow, removing excess vegetation, general housekeeping, and maintaining your storm drain structures. It's important to keep records. One way to keep records I found is to create some sort of a checklist. And like Chelsea stated, the state has done well at giving us a checklist and making it to where it's recorded as it should be and turned in. That way you do have that record if you need to come back and talk to somebody. And this is what it can be if they have to come out and clean it with a vacuum truck. The catch basin sump, they have stuff out there and all that talks about how often it should be cleaned, how it shouldn't be cleaned. And I myself thought about this morning as I was driving through a great big puddle because the snow and everything this morning. I was like, how many of us really like to drive through that just because the storm drain is plugged up? So anything we can do to take care of them is in our best interest. I'm gonna say I probably ran short, but that's what I have.
Awesome. Thanks, Charles. So if people have questions for Charles or want him to go into some more detail, feel free to put those questions or comments in the chat. I know a couple have come in, and we'll pose them during the Q&A session. So building off of Charles' overview of maintenance of specific structures, I'm going to turn the time over to James from Spanish Fork City, who's going to talk a little bit about something we're all familiar with, sprinklers and that source of water and what that may mean for stormwater when it comes to pollution. So with that, I'll turn the time over to you, James.
Thanks, Jake. So this topic of sprinklers with pollution, I've known about, but didn't dive into it too deep until we decided to talk about it. It is a problem. It's something you may not notice. Maybe on an aerial map you'll notice, but we get a lot more pollutants washed into our storm drain systems by sprinklers, overwatering or spraying onto asphalt, concrete, more so than rain washes into the storm drain systems. So problems of landscape watering runoff. So this can wash pollutants into the private and municipal storm systems. It can cause failures to stormwater structures, can add to maintenance costs, and ultimately it can send unwanted substances to our water sources. And that image, if you can see, there's the landscape on the right, and it's being overwatered. The water comes over the curb, drains out onto the asphalt and into the storm drain, and it just takes any pollutant that's on the hardscape right into the drain, as well as unwanted nutrients from the landscape. Some of the pollutants that it can pull in are fertilizers, pesticides, bacterias, oils and chemicals, trash and debris. And those images as well, it's you can see the sheen on that water on the asphalt. possibly gas or a chemical from a vehicle. It's a pretty common thing. And then the landscaped area there was mowed. You've seen images in the other presentations where there's clippings in the gutter. That as well can end up in the storm drain from the landscape watering runoff. Stormwater control failures. So storm inlets blocked by pollutants. If you've seen ponding in a roadway where it is not intentional, if you could uncover the water, you could see maybe a grocery bag covering up that storm inlet, or who knows what pollutants can cover those, but they do, and that can flood unwanted areas and damage asphalt, among other things. Retention systems build up. So when I think of that, I think of basins I've seen in the field where they become garbage collection basins. And I think that's common with ones that are not maintained, and it can become quite the maintenance task to do that, but it's regular maintenance that keeps up on that. They can also get sediment in them, any of those pollutants. And when that keeps the water from infiltrating or leaving through an outlet pipe at a suggested rate, becomes a problem when the basin cannot do its job or what it was intended to do. Older existing storm drain controls. We helped an individual here with a private sump not too long ago, and it had never been properly maintained. And so the walls of that sump became lined with debris, not letting the water infiltrate into the soils how it was intended to be used, and it became a ponding issue for them on site. And it stunk, among other things, and was unwanted. And those are a few control failures. There's other things we've seen. Chelsea talked about that snout in the inlet. We use those quite a bit in Spanish Fork, and without cleaning those inlet boxes, at some point it can become hard for those storm structures to do their job. I have a picture of some storm check chambers here. And most of the underground chambers like these have a check port, so you can access them from above ground and clean them. But not all the chambers have an inspection port. So if that snout I talked about fails and one of these chambers fills up with unwanted debris and then can't do its job, that becomes a failed item, unwanted failed item. These work very well though, if everything's maintained and it's working efficiently. Additional maintenance costs. So deep cleaning or replacement of underground chambers. So those storm techs I just showed you, if you have those under a parking lot to retain your stormwater, to replace those would be costly. So regular maintenance of the upstream items is definitely wanted and needed. Silt and debris buildup removal. I think this is a tough one. Even as I talked about the basins, if you get silt or sediment blowing in there over time, how do you clean that up? If you don't clean it up front, it can become a big maintenance cost if you had to pull out that rock or vegetation and put that back in there. One kind of inventive way I saw of this recently was a company had employees with a backpack blower and the other with a backpack vac. And the one blew the sediment up from the rock, the other was vacuuming the sediment that got raised in the air. So you can be creative with these as well. Vegetation replacement. if you have an area that pools up from an inlet being blocked and you get maybe some of those chemicals on the asphalt into your vegetation, there's lots of ways, but if that gets killed and it's vegetation that helps with your storm system, maybe you have a kind of a natural swell where the plants suck up the nutrients that is not wanted in the lake. When those die, or if they die, to replace those trees or plants can become expensive. Asphalt lifting, Utah, we see that a lot where we get snow one day like today, and then it melts, and then it can freeze. In those same areas we talked about where you get water pooling that should not be pooling, and then it freezes and thaws, it can cause damage to your asphalt, and we don't want to replace asphalt. An excess water bill, we're not talking about water conservation here, but overwatering your landscape can raise that water bill. In this image, this was a site where it was actually a maintenance vehicle that sat for a while and ended up leaking. It got into an inlet. Fortunately, it didn't get into a stream, but as the city, we came and did what we could and assisted them, but ultimately they had to hire a cleanup company to come and take care of that for them. So those are some of the additional maintenance costs. I apologize if you can hear that fire truck. I don't know what's going on. I'll let that pass.
We can't hear it. You're good.
Okay. So causes of landscape watering runoff. Some of these are improper sprinkler placement, correct nozzle selection, poorly aimed sprinkler heads, water pressure fluctuation, watering when windy, and watering duration. And then in this image on the left, you can see where it's been overwatered, the grass, and it's come over the curb across this asphalt, and then it's going over the next curb into a basin. And now there's kind of a buildup of, I'm guessing, sediment and grass clippings, and that's probably not going to be fun to clean out when their system does not work efficiently anymore. And then I was just going to talk on a few of these. Let me get into the next slide here. So simple solutions. So sprinkler adjustment, I think in the spring that's important. Especially on newly developed sites, you get the sprinklers moving from the ground, freezing and thawing. So especially in those first few years, checking those in the spring would be ideal. Smart sprinkler boxes. There are state programs. Spanish Fork did one through the state or other programs as well. I can't remember the name of ours, but they would give you a smart sprinkler box and even install it for you if you had an older box to replace. And those can turn the sprinklers off if it's windy or if it's raining. And they can also help you water efficiently. So if you water for, let's say, 1 hour, the sprinkler box, if you turn it on a certain mode, can turn the water on one of your systems for 15-20 minutes and shut it off. And it lets that water open up the pores in the ground, per se. And then half an hour, 40 minutes later, it turns it back on for another 20 minutes. And that water can really get into your soil. So instead of watering for an hour, you're watering for 40 minutes. Regular sprinkler inspection. I think every time we turn them on in spring at the first of the season, we can check those to make sure they're not broke and they're spraying on the landscape and doing their job. And then I had good housekeeping on here. I just always think that's good for the trash pickup, the sweeping. I know we recommend people use sweepers a lot, but there are a lot of smaller sites, smaller parking lots where it's a lot easier to get a broom and you can't fit a sweeper truck in those. I just talked with a site probably a couple weeks ago where we went through it, and it was an item on their long-term stormwater management plan that Chelsea talked about. And it's actually the site where they came up with the backpack blower and the backpack vac. And we came up with a good plan for their asphalt as well to sweep that up and keep things looking good. And then follow your long-term stormwater management plan. I know that is a new item for a lot of people. Some people haven't even heard of it yet. And I know in my city, we're constantly trying to come up with better ways to implement those. And as we go through implementing them, we have better suggestions for maintenance. And over time, for instance, the underground chambers, the R tanks, kind of the first underground chambers, we had those installed in an area and had them dug up after years and years to inspect how much sediment or leaves are getting into the system. And that helped us improve our design to recommend to developers and keep in our construction standard, and also involved adding an inspection port and a few other things that helped with these long-term stormwater management plan maintenance. And that is all I had. I appreciate you guys letting us come and talk to you about these topics, and hopefully it was informative. And I'll turn the time over to Jake for some question and answers.
Awesome. Thanks, James.